Okay, great. I'm on the mic. I got the ears.
Excellent.
We're set.
Okay.
Before we jump in, anything that's like super alive that you do want to talk about or anything that's off limits?
Ooh. Okay, super alive I do want to talk about is I'm really excited to talk about dimming. And then anything off limits. No.
You're listening to Undimmed, and I'm your host, Cecily Mack. This is a podcast about living a clearer life without dimmers. Things we consume or do to ease discomfort, silence intuition, or simply soften the edges of the day-to-day experience of being human. In my case, I used alcohol for years just to turn the volume down on my inner voices and get through a difficult time in life. But dimmers can include unhealthy or escapist relationships with all kinds of things, including work, perfectionism, spending, sex, food, even generosity. Undimmed is about tuning in to our truest selves, making choices for positive change, and reclaiming power, agency, and freedom from our unwanted habits. I'll be joined in conversation with known and lesser known people, all here to share their journeys to a more clear life. My hope is that within these conversations, some of you might find inspiration, courage, or maybe even a stepping stone that supports you on your own journey to living a life undimmed. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Pattee, the person I think of when asked who inspired my own journey. Really, the entire ClearLife movement. Let's begin. Jennifer, I'm so excited to welcome you to this podcast, to this conversation. I wouldn't be sitting here, and this podcast actually probably wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for that just universally fortuitous crossing of our paths years ago. So this feels like a magic moment for me, and I'm so grateful that we can connect. But before we jump in, please tell us who you are. Where are you? How do we orient with you as a guest?
Well, let's see. I physically am in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now, the birthplace of the best rock and roll musician of all time. They're playing Prince at the coffee shop this morning, my favorite album, my favorite songs. And I'm like, So that's where I am physically. And in terms of like work, I'm a founder working on a startup. I'm a UX designer getting ready to go back to big tech and work as a designer. And I'm an endurance athlete. I'm getting ready to do a cross-country expedition across the United States in June, which I'm incredibly pumped about. Yeah.
I love it. And for those of you who aren't seeing us on Zoom, Jennifer is just one of these kind of extraordinary creatures where you just emanate you're like physically strong. And I know you are such a badass. And we're going to get into your work as an athlete and performance coach and entrepreneur as just a fierce female and all of those things. But I also just have to say, with your super, super stylish headphones and bright blazing red lipstick, I'm just like, you go, girl. Amen to you.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I have to say, right after you asked me to be your guest on this podcast, which I was so excited to be on because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I couldn't talk about my decision to get sober and what happened before and what happened after. Nobody really at that time wanted to hear about it. But I talked to a friend of mine recently and I didn't tell him about this podcast. He just brought it up out of the blue. He's like, I have to thank you because remember that day when we were hanging out together and you mentioned to me that you had stopped drinking? He's like, I stopped drinking that day too.
Chills, man.
I know. I've known this guy for 30 years and he's never told me this before. And that was back in 2013. I'm like, you haven't had a drink for all that time? He's like, no, I just stopped. And it was one of my best decisions ever. And I'm so glad you told me that. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Amen. I mean, I love this. This is the beauty of this. And it's so interesting because you're right. A decade ago, this was not a kosher topic. It was a ticket to isolation in a social setting. It was a guaranteed way to get removed from invitation lists. It was very ostracizing. And we have to go to the impact of those moments, because this is why this podcast exists, is I want our voices and our kind of weird, quirky, meandering, imperfect paths to be available to people who are exploring their own relationship with dimmers or alcohol or whatever their dimmer is. But I wasn't even really in that curious place yet when you and I met. And it was about a decade ago. I was very happily in my daily drinking routines and married to a DJ husband. And it was totally normal to do what we did that day, which was meet a friend, go for a hike, and end up in a bar at 3 or 4 in the afternoon drinking after the healthy hike with little kids in tow, I'll add.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting down with you. The 3 adults at the table ordered a beer. The 4th one being you, I think may have just even ordered water. There wasn't much available in those days for someone not wanting to have an alcoholic drink.
It's true.
And I was fascinated. What do you mean you're not drinking? I think I grilled you.
It didn't feel like grilling. It felt like genuine curiosity. And it's my favorite topic. And I couldn't talk about it because it was the ultimate cringeworthy end of conversation.
And it was fascinating to me the way you described, or you just kind of carried yourself even as not bothering with drinking. Your energy was, it just doesn't really do anything for me anymore. I'm over it. There are other ways to relax at the end of the day. And I remember thinking, that's so interesting. Like, there are other ways to relax other than having a glass or 2 or 3 of wine. And it stuck with me so that when it was years later, I think at least 3 or 4 years later, when I took my own kind of spontaneous, unexpected break from drinking, I had that imprint of you and our conversation in my mind. Like it was something that I could refer back to as an example of somebody who'd made a choice to change their life and wasn't in this big deprivation victim orientation, but was instead talking about how that had resulted in an upgrade. And it really actually kind of helped me organize my thoughts and feelings about cutting out alcohol. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you end up even getting to the point where you decided you wanted to stop?
Absolutely. So it was 2013 and I had dedicated my life to fitness and health and well-being. And I'd actually left my job at Apple to go and start an outdoor fitness company. And I had been running it for, like half a decade at that point. I was very successful. My accountant was like, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it, because my business was doubling in revenue every year. And I was winning all these awards. I was getting featured all these places, Oprah magazine and all these places, successful, taking off. And these guys had just raised a bunch of funding to launch an app that was going to be a fitness app, like having a personal trainer in your pocket, AI app, which no one was really doing then. It sounds like so basic today, but no one was doing it then. And they raised this money and they asked around, who's the best trainer in San Francisco? And everybody pointed them to me. And so they called me up and they're like, hey, we want you to be an advisor on this app. And I said, okay, but I was super nervous. And then I did the thing. Like, I delivered what they wanted. I'd already finished the job. It was the funnest, easiest job of my life, but I was still nervous about it. And then they asked me to come to an offsite party at one of their investors' house. It was a fancy house in Stinson Beach. And I was so nervous. They're like, the whole company's going to be there. I'm like, okay. And so I go to Stinson Beach and I get there and they serve me a drink at the door, a Paloma. And then we have dinner and really good wine. And they serve this amazing wine, but they were all like no carb at that time. They were like keto. So there was no carbohydrates to absorb all the alcohol. And basically I got wasted and I passed out, fortunately, at like 11 p.m., but I had to work the next morning in San Francisco at 6 a.m. I had a client, a very important client, and a client who was going to be so fundamental in my takeoff at the next level of my career. Like it was a real estate deal was going on. There was a partnership with the mayor's office going on. I had all these corporate things going on. Like this was a really important meeting that I had at 6 a.m. and I was wasted. And so I wake up at 4 a.m. I have to walk to my car, get in my car, driving in Marin, the windy road. And I'm like realizing, I'm like, wait, wow, this is really weird how I feel. I'm not hungover. I'm still drunk. And I am driving very fast. And fortunately, because I swear to God, there are so many angels in my hair and over my shoulder, I got to my appointment in San Francisco at 6 a.m. I was 2 minutes late and I just kept working like nothing happened. But the upshot was I was so ashamed because I was on the cusp of destroying everything that mattered to me in my life, everything that was good. It was a near-death experience. It was not a physical death, but definitely a spiritual death. And I was so ashamed because I knew that I was doing it to myself. I was so ashamed. The people I talked to about it, my friends, are like, don't be so hard on yourself. That's called being human. I'm like, no, this is more. And so with that shame, I started asking myself, okay, tenderly, I'm like, why did you do that? And I was like, well, because I was really nervous and uncertain. I was like, okay, why were you nervous? And I'm like, well, because I don't really think I was supposed to be there in that room. Well, why don't you feel you're supposed to be there in the room? And I kept on asking why, like 5 whys. And I'm like, I landed on worthiness. I didn't feel like I was worthy of being in that room. And once I landed on a worthiness issue, a self-worth issue, because I'm a trainer, I'm like, well, that's a muscle. That self-worth, that belonging in that room, that's a muscle. And the only way that you're going to develop that muscle is if you keep on getting into those situations without the alcohol, that you just raw dog it and you just go in and you keep on going and you experience what it's like to not feel enough of anything until you get comfortable and feel that you're enough. And so as soon as I call it my Beyonce moment, because I remember reading somewhere that Beyonce doesn't drink. And she was like, I have to be on 24 hours a day because I have so many opportunities coming at me. I have to be ready. And that's how I want it to be. I have so many opportunities coming 24 hours a day. I want to be ready for them. I don't want to be hungover. So that was basically the story. And once I identified that as a muscle, I was like, alcohol, gone. Didn't drink again for 7 years. And then things got really interesting. Because basically, once I stopped drinking, I went on this journey and it changed the trajectory of my life forever. But first, 3 really bad things had to happen. But I'll pause there just in case you have any other questions. Otherwise, I can
this
continue.
is amazing. I mean, okay, a couple clarifying questions, and then we need to get to these 3 things. So you just made a decision that day. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Did you lean into any type of like program or book, or did you go to an AA meeting, or what? Did you have anything supporting you through this other than just your sheer willpower and a clear decision?
Remember the Christmas Carol?
Yeah.
It's like the ghosts of Christmas future came to me. And they're like, choose the movie that you want to see for the rest of your life. Do you want the path that drinking goes to? Because what you just experienced of driving drunk, being late, embarrassment. Because if one of my trainers had showed up to work drunk, I would have fired them immediately. So I had to fire myself, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that could be the rest of your life, what you just experienced, or you could have this other life. I mean, AA is wonderful and I applaud everyone, the program, everybody who does that, like mad props. It's not easy, but it just wasn't what I chose at that point. Like I had this knowing. I chose my Beyonce life and it was in that way, it was easy, and then I figured some tools out along the way, like how to relax, but the choice was easy. I never craved alcohol again.
That's awesome. And I love it because I think that we have this misunderstanding in our culture that it has to be hard. And I know from speaking with many people and my own experience, different things are hard for different people for different reasons, right? So, for example, in my experience, moderating was really hard. I used to do this thing where I'd say, I'm only going to drink 1 drink a night. or I'm only going to drink on weekends, or I'm never going to drink at home. And again, I was never a falling down drunk. Never got a DUI. I never put my kids in jeopardy. I don't even think very many people have ever seen me past a buzz. And so it startled people when I stopped because they were confused and curious. I didn't know you had a problem. Whole nother podcast, right? But there's something about this access to a choice that I think people don't realize is there. Like it might be very hard to moderate because frankly, you have one drink and it kind of takes down your inhibitions and your fuck it muscle kicks in. And before you know it, like, I'll have a second and you're waking up the next morning feeling like crap.
I didn't know that's what that muscle was called.
Thank you, yeah. I sometimes miss my fuck it muscle. It helped me book a lot of like very spontaneous, mindless vacations and buy clothes I would have never otherwise thought were a good idea. There's a long list. But for some reason, just making a decision, very similar actually, and I've heard this many times. You want to go left, you want to go right. This is your Beyonce life. This is the path you're on. Which one do you want to choose? And I love that people can hear directly from you. It actually doesn't have to be hard. You can actually decide right now, listening to these voices. Alcohol is a progressively addictive substance, right? So we start using, eventually most people are abusing. And if you abuse for long enough, many folks are going to end up addicted. And I had somebody tell me who really knows what they're talking about that I got off of the train in that abuse channel, right? When it was easy to make the choice, just make like you did too. We just made the decision. If I'd waited another 5 or 10 years, maybe it wouldn't have been that easy. Maybe it wouldn't have been as easy for you. There's not only psychological and emotional attachments, but there are also physical addictions and dependencies that can develop if we use something for long enough. So in a lot of ways, it's a real life blessing to at a certain moment just say enough is enough. Well, it's easy to just make it a judgment call. Like, this is not the life I want to live anymore.
But I will say, and in full disclosure, that it wasn't hard because I was given this really beautiful choice. It got harder later. And I think I said something about 7 years. Like recently, I went back to drinking and I like to think of it as an experiment. And I collected some data almost to make sure, just to make sure I had made the right decision, because I had gotten to a point where I was wondering, was my decision to stop drinking and to be sober, was that coming from a place of vigilance? Because I had such a hard line about it, like 0 drinking, not a sip, absolutely 0 drinking. I was like, is that coming from a place of vigilance? Like, is it because I don't trust myself?
Is vigilance a negative? Help unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, at that time in my head, it just felt like I was holding on to something really tightly from a place of not trusting myself. Like almost like I had this part of me who was like, no, you can't be trusted with alcohol.
I totally get that.
And I was like, well, how do we know I can't be trusted with alcohol? Like maybe I could trust myself. I want to be able to trust myself. That's kind of how that conversation went. I guess that was my attempt, my experiment with moderation, which one of the sober women on Instagram, she calls it the hell of moderation, the inner hell or secret hell of moderation. It is hell. And that's kind of what I experienced for that about year and a half when I was trying to do moderation. And the experiment concluded very conclusively that moderation is hell. It doesn't work for me. And so I stopped again, completely stopped with no question that it's not good for me. I don't want it. And it leads to that really horrible Christmas future that I don't want to have anything to do with. But by staying on the path of sobriety, I get the really wonderful Beyonce life that's meant for me. But what I learned from that moderation was what I thought was vigilance was actually a form of kind of white knuckling it through when things got hard, when life got hard and not drinking got hard. And I needed some support. And that white knuckling, I learned we're not supposed to white knuckle our way through anything, especially if it's white knuckling against a addictive substance. What we're meant to do when things get hard is we're meant to reach out and seek connection and be connected to each other. that is how we're meant to get through things that are really hard, is through connection, not through ding, 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 dimming.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I really, I love and appreciate that you went through that moderation experiment journey as you did, because I think one of the best feelings that we get to have if we're living without our dimmer of choice is that we're living each day without it because we choose to, right? So I tell myself and I tell people all the time, I'll drink again if I want to. And with one exception, which was actually quite recent, I haven't even had the inclination or the desire. I've never thought, oh, a drink would be really good right now, which is affirmative that the work is happening, right? That we have created or we are creating a life that we don't want to dim out or escape from. And when we do have those inclinations, it feels like a little tap on the shoulder to do exactly what you just described so beautifully, which is find connection. Pay attention to what it is that we're missing. Ask for help if we need help. Phone a friend. Text somebody to just kind of be there with us, not necessarily in a help me stay sober moment. It doesn't have to be that at all. It could be just that we're going through something and we need a better way to deal with the discomfort than pouring ethanol on it, which doesn't do anybody any favors.
It's so true. I've been thinking a lot about dimming, and, the thing that we're dimming is often like the pain of our problems, but we're meant to feel that pain. And what is life if not a series of problems happening one after the other, right?
And we really, those are our messages too, right? If we're feeling uncomfortable or we're feeling awkward or our intuition is waking us up at 3 a.m. consistently, there's some message within us that needs to be heard. And I know from my own experience, I had a lot of years, my own version of imposter complex, my own version of an unhealthy relationship and so on, where I just really didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of change.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to disappoint people who thought I'd built this picture perfect life. And so I postponed the pain, like the bigger pain of the change, which came with the even bigger joy of the results, by dimming out that discomfort every night, coming in the front door, feeling tension in the house, have a cocktail. Everything's fine. We're good. Have a glass of wine. We're good. Go to bed, start the whole thing all over again the next day. And I often wonder how life would have been different in those years. But what would have been different if I wasn't dimming out that discomfort? It's our inner language with ourselves. It's how we know we need to change something. And it's no wonder that when people stop drinking, whether it's a spontaneous choice or with a lot of help from AA or rehab or whatever it is, they often pop our heads up and look around and think, wow, quite a mess we've made here, because we haven't been listening to those signals for so long. We've been overriding those signals. I want to go back to, you mentioned 3 things that happened in 2000, I guess it was 13, 14 or 13 when you stopped drinking, that were surprises. You kind of have me on an edge here. What happened immediately after that came up?
3 really bad things happened, and then 1 really good thing happened. So my mom died. That was really bad. I broke my ankle. And for somebody I broke my ankle running the race of a lifetime, which was the Quad Dipsy in your backyard. So it's going to be my first ultra marathon. And I broke it walking and crossing the street to get some water. It was so tragic. So broke my ankle, which turned out to be a really bad thing for me. And then the third thing, I got audited by the IRS, which I won. I just want to go on record. I was charged $0. But as anybody can imagine, any one of those events would be a major life stressor. But to have three of them happen in rapid succession, especially like having my mom pass right after I stopped drinking and then break my ankle. So I was basically like laid up in the house and they couldn't do surgery. It turned out to be just a really bad break. So I was laid up in the house on the couch. And when you're an athlete on the couch, you're like a caged animal. And I had to confront all of my demons on that couch, and I had to do it without alcohol because I decided not to drink. So I wasn't doing it. But it was really horrible for me personally, or it was really painful, shall I say. It was painful for me because I was grieving my mom. I felt powerless. I had to ask for a lot of help because the orthopedic surgeon is like, okay, and now you're going to go home and lay on the couch for a week and you'll be home for a month or so, maybe longer. And I'm like, okay, so I'm on the couch except for when I'm leading classes and running my business, right? And he's like, no, you're not leaving the couch. And I'm like, well, who's supposed to run my classes? I've got these corporate classes. I've got all this important stuff. And he's like, well, now's the time to call in some favors. I'm like, what? Now I have to ask for help.
You said the F word.
I know. What? And so it was rough, right? Going through those things. I learned a lot about myself. I started writing crazy Unabomber missives in my journal. Like I was like losing it. I learned what kind of handicapped person I would be. I went to a TEDx conference and I was like hitting people with my cane. I'm like, get out of my way. I was like so angry, right? And frustrated at the quote unquote limitations of my body. But, then I started getting better. And my orthopedic surgeon was like, I went in for an appointment. He's like, okay, today I'd like you to ride your bike. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, go ride your bike. Go have some fun. And so it was Indian summer and I jump on my bike, first time, cast off, everything off, go on my bike. And I was living by the Panhandle near Golden Gate Park. So I go up by Trader Joe's and then I'm at the top of the city, on top of Masonic or whatever hill that is. And it's sunset and the sun is golden. It's filling up the sky. It's reflecting off of the Murie building. I'm on my way down to the marina. So it's like going to be a roller coaster on my bike, just like beautiful, flowy downhills. And so I start my descent. I'm going down on my bike and I'm standing up in the air and against my skin. I feel so happy. I feel so alive. It was like Wizard of Oz going from black and white to Technicolor. And I am flying and every cell in my body is doing the samba. It's like there's a dance going on at a cellular level. And I realize I'm having this moment that like born again Christians call like being born again. I was born again. It was every drug, everything in my life, high I've ever experienced going off at the same time. It was better than that. And I was like, oh my God, this is what it means to be alive. This is aliveness. This is our life on this planet, in this existence, in the universe. This is humanity. This is being alive. And I was like, there is nothing special about today. It is a Wednesday afternoon at 7 p.m. and it is always available to me and all of us. And it's always been available, always. It was in that moment I realized when I was drinking, I wasn't just numbing the pain or dimming the hard days. I was also numbing the good days and the joy. And I was dimming the joy. And I was like, holy mother of God, I am so glad I learned this lesson because I don't want to dim joy. This is amazing.
Yeah,
I want to feel this whenever it's available to me. I want to make this for myself. But this doesn't come from drinking. This comes from gratitude. Brene Brown says that the thing to unlock joy, all joy is unlocked by gratitude. And the most joyous people are the most grateful. And that's what I was experiencing. I was so grateful to my doctor and my ankle and my bicycle and my city. I was so grateful. And however, I became alive. I was so grateful and aware of that moment. And then boom, all the joy. And so that was the gift. And that was the thing that changed the trajectory of my life. I'm still on that trajectory. And I'm so grateful to the me of 2013 who made that decision, who had that courage and that willingness to go in and ask those questions.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I have chills up my back with your description. It's extraordinary. And I want to ask, do you think, based on your own experience, that dimmers, in your case, in my case, drinking, keeps us in the middle of the spectrum of experience. So we might not experience real pain and difficulty, but then we also are missing out on the real extreme joy. Does it keep us sort of in the middle? Or how else could you describe that learning you had from this?
I think it keeps us, I think it does keep us in a kind of messy middle of our purpose here on the planet. Like, we're never fully going to actualize ourselves and our experience here in this life if we're dimming, because you have to ask yourself, what are you dimming? Like, what is the dimmer switch attached to? Like, we think that we're dimming our experience of pain. We're just bringing it down a notch because we're a parent, and I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to how hard it is, but I understand it's very hard. And so it might be I just need to take it down a notch because I'm a mom and I'm a worker and I'm a daughter and I'm an executive and I got a lot going on in my life. And so I just need to take it down a notch, right? And so we think that we're dimming the intensity of our existence, of our life, just a notch, right? But that's not what we're dimming. I believe that the thing that we're dimming is our radiance, our aliveness, right? Our experience of life on this planet, which I now like to call Earth School. We're all just going through Earth School, and we're here to learn a series of lessons. And the faster we learn them, the higher we advance in Earth School. And it's also the best party there is. And so I want to learn those lessons and get to that high level because I think it's what the Buddhists call enlightenment at the end, right? And that's what I want. I want to feel my radiance full blast. And I want to experience that transcendence and that inner peace that you see in the eyes of the monks and the people who are joyous and the people who are grateful. I want to experience my radiance. And the only way I think I can get there is for me to experience the pain. That's you going through classes at our school. We are put here to grow, and the growth comes from the pain and the connection. And so I think that's what we're dimming is our life force. It's not our everyday lives.
Do you think there's ever a time, whether it was before or after you stopped drinking, that you were intimidated by or afraid of your potential, of your radiance?
No, but I was afraid of the way other people reacted to it. Because where my life force takes me, the places that I'm called to go, personally, professionally, I believe that I am a catalyst. Like, if you ask me to sum up who I am, why I'm here in one word, I'm a catalyst. Like, I am here to fuck things up. And I am here to make a change. And I am here to make a big change. And I've always known that. And I've always felt that. And sometimes it's annoying because I'm a very shy person, and I was called to lead outdoor fitness classes. I was called to lead people in classes of sometimes 150, 200 people. And as a shy person, that's terrifying, right? I'm like, oh man, do I have to do this again? That's a lot of people. That's a CEO of Lululemon. Could we not have to be called to do this today? But really, I was scared of the ways that people, mostly men and cruelly, sometimes women, would react when I would talk about the things that I was called to do as an athlete and the journeys that I was called to go, and to see how far could I go in the outdoors. Could I run across the Alps 100 miles in a day? Could I run across the desert 100 miles in one go? Could I do that? I think I can. I think I must. And even my father at that time was like, honey, I don't think you should do that race. You could get hurt. And then I did it. Absolutely. He's never told me not to do something before. And then I did it. And it's like every time I did one of these long races into the wild, I came back a different person. And I learned so much about my own potential, but also all of our potential. I learned about human potential. And I learned that we are only operating with a fraction of what we're capable of. And the experience of going out there and discovering what you're capable of, it doesn't suck. It's a little bit hard, but it is transcendent. It is incredible what you see out there. I had the most amazing experiences at every long race I did in the Alps, and unreal. And yet when I would talk about it, people would be that's crazy that you're doing that over and over again. That's crazy that you want to do that. What are you doing? She's crazy. Bitch, be cray. And in the beginning, I was like, but no, I'm not. I'm not crazy. Like, this comes from my heart. It's really important to me. No, I'm not crazy. Listen, you need to stop calling women crazy. Like, women have had their uteruses removed in the Middle Ages because men wanted to hold them back, and they were telling the woman this had to be done because she was hysterical. She was crazy. We need to stop talking and calling women crazy. I'm brave. I'm courageous. And I want to talk about the thing I discovered out there, but you're not asking me about that. And then I realized the reason why they weren't asking me about that is because the very act of my desire, the very dream I had to go and do it, and the certainty that I belonged and could probably be successful was a threat.
Yeah.
And that scared me for a long time. That scared me. That held me back. It took me a long time, Cecily. I'm 52 years old and I'm finally comfortable with that. My ambition and my drive to go out into the wild. But man, it took me a long time. I was more scared of how people were reacting to me than I was of why I was here and what I was capable of.
Yeah. It's so awesome. And what you're sharing is such an invitation. I really think women in particular today in this era, we need to feel great about stepping into our capacity and our potential and our power. And you note this really important nuance. Often it's not us that have a problem or a concern with it. It's our reaction to other people's reactions.
Mm-hmm.
We make people feel uncomfortable sometimes when we fully show up and radiate. And I think this is one reason why, I know in the audience for all my ClearLife work, it's 70, 80% women a lot of the time, depending on the channel and the topic. But I think many of us are discovering that we've been kind of holding ourselves back from our fullness to make the people around us feel better.
Mm-hmm.
You're a fantastic example of somebody who just said, screw that, that's not my path, and are being very bold about what you're doing and how you're doing it and why. One thing I remember hearing a lot in my teens and 20s, particularly from older men or older women who are kind of seeing me come into my own in my career and my life, where, you might want to turn it down a notch.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
You came on a little strong at that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the party where I wore the backless dress with the red lipstick and felt fantastic with my date that I was proud to be there with. Like, I'm sorry, my showing up as myself makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah. I've had not one, but multiple men tell me that my problems with dating were because I was so tall.
Oh, yeah. No, I was coached by my beloved own father to not talk too much about my career aspirations when I was dating in my 20s, because I'd never land a good guy.
But it's changing. It's changing. Like, as you know, like what I'm doing with my startup is really about service and supporting female leaders through coaching, and a specific type of coaching, which I believe is the most powerful type of coaching, which is sports psychology. So that's the mental coaching that athletes get from their sports psychologists or really good coaches that enable them to do impossible things. So that's sports psychology. I didn't know it at the time, but my coaches were using sports psychology on me to enable me to do these incredibly long, hardest races in the world. Right. And that was the mental coaching that enabled me to keep going when my brain was telling me to shut down. It was the mental story about myself that enabled me to keep showing up for training when it was raining, when it was uncomfortable, when it was all the signs were saying, you should not go out there and train. You should not go out there and do that race. It was the mental story that told me I can and I must and I will. And so sports psychology, I think, is absolutely fire. And the reason why I want to help female leaders is because I really feel at this point in history, and this image comes to me from a tribe in the Amazon. They have a story that they've been passing down generation after generation about civilization, human civilization. They use the metaphor of a bird. And the bird is the thing that's carrying human civilization forward. And for all of history, since the beginning of civilization, the bird has been flapping with one wing. Right? And the power that's flapping the wing, that's helping the wing go up and down, has been male, the male part of humanity, right? So all of the progress forward, that bird, it's all the men who are propelling civilization forward. And now, because the other wing, it couldn't get up to fly, right? But now we are at a period in our history, in the century that we're in now, where finally the women are able to lift the wing so that the men don't have to flap that wing alone anymore. Like, a lot of men don't want to be flapping the wing alone. Like, a lot of men are like, I'm done with the patriarchy. I'm ready for it to stop. And now is the time. I truly believe it. We can see it everywhere now, that women are starting to rise and that wing is starting to flap. There's one of the political races I'm about to jump in and get involved with and start supporting is happening in Utah right now. There's a mountain athlete named Carolyn Gleick who's running for Congress to represent Utah. And she talks a lot about what she learned as a professional athlete. And she's using her stories to inspire people in her state to fight things like climate change. She's like, we can do hard things. It seems impossible right now, but I have experienced what it's like to overcome the impossible in my own life. We can do this together as a city, as a state, as a nation. And so now is the time. I think we are no longer going to be so quick to hold women down and get discouraged and uncomfortable with their power, because they're sharing their stories. And in the same way that my story inspired you at Beerworks, and then this podcast is going to inspire so many women who are on the cusp of quitting drinking, like now it's just taking off. And I think we're going to see more and more women stepping into their power and no longer worried about making people feel uncomfortable, because there will be enough people now cheering them on.
Yeah, it's so true. It is. It feels like a movement. It feels like a real massive global cultural shift. And you're right. It's everywhere. And I love it that you're taking what you've learned in both your personal and professional journey and channeling it in this way. It feels like a real offering. It's awesome. I love it.
You.
I can't wait to see what you do with it.
Thank you.
Is there anything that I should have asked you about that I didn't?
Yeah. What am I doing on my cross-country expedition?
What are you doing on your cross-country expedition?
So I'm a trail runner, but lately I've been gravel biking, and a gravel bike is it's like a mashup between a road bike and a mountain bike. I love being out there on my bike and on the trails. And so I found out about this trail that goes from Canada to Mexico. It's a trail that was built by a nonprofit called the Adventure Cycling Association that was started the year I was born in 1971. And it goes through the Rockies. And so it's about 2,000 miles, give or take. And I did the Montana section 2 years ago, and now I'm going back and training to do the whole thing. So I will fly to Calgary. I will bike over to Banff from Calgary. It's like one of the most beautiful bike rides in the world through the Canadian Rockies. And then we will ride our bikes as best as we can through Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, down to the Mexican border.
Oh my gosh. You go, girl. That's amazing.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I have one more question for you. If you could go back to the version of you before that blessing of a night at Stinson Beach and tell yourself something in that era when you hadn't broken free from this dimming tendency yet, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, God, it's a beautiful question. You know, I would get in my ear and in a very sweet voice, I would say, I got you. I got you. Like, I would let myself know that I have a higher self and my higher self is holding me. I'm held. Because I think that was the feeling that I felt at that time in my life. I think I felt that I was alone. And because I didn't feel like people understood me, or because I felt like people were holding me back, and sometimes they were actively holding me back, but it was that feeling of being alone. And I would tell myself that I got you. You are held. You're held by something that is more powerful than you know, and it's you.
Yeah.
Like we all are.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Thank you so much for your candor and your open-heartedness and your fire and everything that you're doing for yourself and leading by example and offering to others on their own path. How do we find you? How do we follow your adventures?
Well, on Instagram, it's at Jen_Pattee, JENN_PATTEE. And that is the best way to find me. I'm going to do a Substack because I have a lot of people who aren't on Instagram and they want to follow along in the form of a newsletter. So I'll put a link in my Instagram so people can get my newsletter. But yeah, that's the best way to reach me. And thank you, Cecily. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. It's such an honor. And for having a chance to share this conversation with you. And I want to thank you for taking the time and using these moments from your wild and precious life to have these conversations and open these doors up for people, because you're going to help a lot of people with your work.
Thank you. It feels like a channel, and you have absolutely been a North Star. So thank you so much. Really. Hearts. We're making hearts in the screen. So good to see you. Safe journey to you. I wish you just the best. Thank you, Jennifer Pattee, for joining us today. Jen is an endurance athlete, an Apple trained designer, and a Y Combinator founder who's democratizing access to executive coaching through her new startup, Coach. She's been featured in Oprah Magazine, San Francisco Magazine, and at South by Southwest for her unique approach to revitalizing cities and building community through fitness. She's on a mission to normalize women pushing boundaries that no one calls the next generation of girls' dreams crazy. You've been listening to Undimmed, a ClearLife podcast. ClearLife is more than a series of conversations. ClearLife is a movement. If you want to learn more, go to CecilyMack.com. That's CECILYMAK. You can also follow me on Instagram at ClearLife Journey or subscribe to the Substack under my name, Cecily Mack. I want to thank a few humans who made this possible. First and foremost, Joanne Jennings for producing Undimmed. Second, Laura Insera, the magician behind the music, which she composed and recorded for this show. And Matteo Schimpf, who mixed and mastered what you heard today, including additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thank you for joining us. Be well.